And right now, we're going to go to the phone line with our special guest today. It's Chris Hummer, national college football writer for us here at 24/7 Sports. Chris, thanks for joining us today. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. So the way we do things around here, Chris, we're always looking for a winner and a loser. Who was your biggest winner from this past weekend?
All right, let me set the scene real quick before I get there.
Sure.
Maryland let its students out of class early on Friday afternoon, trying to create a huge atmosphere in College Park against Penn State. A couple hours later, final score is Penn State 59, Maryland nothing. That's why Penn State is my biggest winner of the weekend, even though they played on Friday. Not only is this a huge win for recruiting, Penn State recruits the DMV really hard, and they're going to go head-to-head with Maryland over the next few years. But this, from a big picture perspective, means you kind of have to take Penn State seriously this season in terms of not only the Big Ten, but potentially the college football playoff. Penn State entered the year having the look of a team that was probably a year away. They were really young on both sides of the ball, talented. Their 24/7 Sports team talent composite ranking has jumped up to 10th in the country. Talented enough to compete for a championship, but really young, especially with a new quarterback, Sean Clifford, replacing Trace McSorley. But Sean Clifford has played really well earlier in the season. And given the way Penn State went on the road and just dominated a rival, you have to like Penn State's chances later in the season with a schedule that sets up really, really well.
I think Penn State was really impressive. Anytime you beat a team like Maryland, who was blowing out teams earlier in the year, 59-0, that's impressive. But my biggest winner of the week has to go to Alabama, moving up to #1 in the AP poll and absolutely dominating Ole Miss. And that connection that Tua Tagovailoa showed with wide receiver Devonta Smith, connecting for 11 receptions, 274 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Hard to find a better performance across college football this past weekend. But it's not all about winners. We want to know who your biggest loser is as well, Chris. So lay it on us. Who's your biggest loser of the week?
Yeah, it'd be Virginia Tech and head coach Justin Fuente. I'd like to point out that Devonta Smith had more receiving yards than Virginia Tech had offensive yards against Duke in a 45-10 loss. And that's a really bad loss for the Hokies. Duke's going to be one of the worst teams in the ACC this season after losing Daniel Jones and several other players to graduation in the NFL. It's Virginia Tech's second ACC loss of the year, and their only wins are against Old Dominion and Furman, and those were in pretty close fashion. Justin Fuente, who's in year 4 of his tenure, has seen his team drop every season of his regime, from 10 to 9 to 6 a season ago, and there's a pretty decent chance, given the early season play, Virginia Tech's going to be even worse this year than 6 wins. Fuente saw 16 players bolt this offseason to the transfer portal, and that's not something you usually see early in in the middle of a head coach's tenure. Usually you see the program coalesce a little bit. And the worst thing about it was, by the end of the night, if you looked at Justin Fuente's Wikipedia page, and his salary section, it just simply read too damn much. So fans in Blacksburg are not happy with Justin Fuente and the Hokies right now.
I'll tell you what, Chris, that one was a real head scratcher for me. But my biggest pick for biggest loser would have to go to Purdue. Not only did they lose to Minnesota, the bigger loss might have been the players that got hurt, losing starting quarterback Elijah Sindelar and wide receiver Rondale Moore. That's just crushing for the Boilermakers. But before we let you go, Chris, I want to know any other takeaways from around the college football world this weekend.
Yeah, I think given the way we saw Clemson struggle with North Carolina and Alabama's defense, again, against Ole Miss, struggle a little bit, I think we have a little bit more parity than we've had the last couple seasons of college football. Ohio State looked great against Nebraska. LSU has a really big early season win over Texas. Georgia has a really big early season win over Notre Dame. I think realistically, you can go 7 or 8 deep in terms of college football playoff contenders this year and national championship contenders this year. And I don't really think we've been able to say that during this Clemson and Alabama reign of dominance. So I think college football as a whole has a few more teams this season that could potentially legitimately win the national championship than it has in years past.
Yeah, Chris, that's got me excited. The way Ohio State looked, absolutely dominant. I think that Oklahoma, Georgia, and LSU could also get into that national conversation for the national championship. It's not just Before the season, it felt like we were resigned to Alabama-Clemson Part 5, and we may still get it, maybe in the college football playoff semifinal, but if we're spared that in the final and we get a new team in there, I think everyone would be happy. I know everyone's happy with this interview. Chris, thank you so much for coming on. Everyone at home, make sure you're following Chris on Twitter at Chris_Hummer and reading his work over at 247sports.com. Chris will have you again on shortly.